2024 presidential race is set as a rematch of 2020. And even though Donald Trump faces 91 federal, state, and felony charges, his grip on the Republican Party has never been stronger. In the new edition of How We Win the Civil War, author and political thought leader Steve Phillips discusses the new American majority, which consists of people of color plus progressive whites, a coalition of people who want to see America become a multiracial democracy. Phillips believes that with the new American majority, Democrats could and should keep the White House, flip the House, and hold the Senate, thereby defending the multiracial democracy from attacks by modern-day Confederates. All of this, however, comes at a time when, according to Phillips, we already are in a civil war. Stay with us to meet Steve Phillips and hear what he has to say.
Welcome to Lean to the Left, home of no-holds-barred commentary, plus interviews with fascinating people, some of them top experts, others simply with interesting stories to tell. You'll never know who'll show up at Lean to the Left. Now here's your host, Bob Gaddy.
Now, in his book, How We Win the Civil War, Steve Phillips analyzes the 2022 midterm elections, including why there was no red wave and why Stacey Abrams lost, but Reverend Raphael Warnock won in Georgia. Democrats, he contends, must recognize that we're in a contest between democracy and white supremacy, left unresolved after the Civil War. And he says Trump's entire agenda is focused on making America white again. His work serves as a roadmap towards securing a multiracial democracy and provides a stepping stone towards ending white supremacy for good. Phillips is a New York Times best-selling author, columnist, and the author of the New York Times and Washington Post best-selling Brown is the New White: How the Demographic Revolution Has Created a New American Majority. He is also the founder of Democracy in Color, a political media organization dedicated to race, politics, and the multicultural progressive New American Majority. Steve hosts Democracy in Color with Steve Phillips, a color-conscious podcast on politics, and he's a regular columnist for The Nation and The Guardian. The updated paperback edition of his book, How We Win the Civil War, was just published on March 12th. Steve Phillips, thanks so much for joining us on the Lean to the Left podcast.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Hey, in your new book, you warn that the Confederates never stopped fighting the Civil War, that conservatives are taking full advantage of this reality, and that those in denial imperil our democracy. Is this election more about defending and preserving than anything else, Steve?
It very much is. In the new preface to the new edition of the book, I talk about how this election is very akin to 1876, which was after 10 years of Reconstruction. And so it really was a referendum around were we going to continue to move forward to try to make this country a multiracial democracy, or were we going to go backwards and in essence hand the country back to the slaveholders?
Right.
And that's exactly what happened in that election, plunging the country back into legalized white supremacy for almost 100 years. And with the cornerstones of what Trump's appeal has been, the xenophobia, attacking immigrants, fanning the flames of the fears of white racial resentment within this country, this is very much what is driving this election in terms of where we're going to go. Which direction? Are we going to continue to move forward towards being a multiracial democracy, or are we going to go back to what I title the Trump chapter as making America white again?
Yeah. We should get a hat that says that, right? How did Trump manage to become so damn powerful within the Republican Party, Steve? He's got so many flaws that run counter to traditional Republican beliefs.
So that's the point, is that you see the hypocrisy, or certainly how little they actually subscribe to those core values.
Yeah.
Whereas the single most important thing is the fear and the anger and the anxiety that he uses as the cornerstones of his appeal. When he first entered the race in May 2015,
Yeah.
he was only at 4% in the polls. In that, since then, he when he got into the race and then he started calling Mexicans rapists and murderers and really scaring people that these dark-skinned people from the south of the border were going to come in and change our composition of our country, he zoomed up in the polls.
Yeah.
And so this notion about him as the defender of the way the country used to be is core and is paramount and more important than anything, than their values, than the policies, than 91 felony charges against him. As long as he will defend the view of what this country once was, they're going to back him forever.
I have to ask you, Steve, why in the hell would any person of color support this guy? Here in South Carolina, we have a black U.S. Senator, Tim Scott, who's one of Trump's chief sycophants. And he apparently hopes to be Trump's vice presidential running mate. I just don't understand, though, how any serious person of color could have any degree of support for this man.
We've never had universal. So there were 6% of African Americans who voted against Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Right. And so I always want to know, who were those people,
Yeah,
right?
right.
What were
Yeah,
they
that was a
actually,
good question.
what were they
Yeah.
thinking? I talk about Tim Scott in my book, and I say that I hope he doesn't think he's in the Senate because he's smart. Now, he may be smart, but he's in the Senate because he's black. He was appointed in December 2012 after Obama's reelection, and the Republicans were like, "Oh, I guess this black thing is a powerful force. We got to figure out what to do." And so Nikki Haley appointed him. He had very little experience. He was like, what? It's like a state legislator. He'd
Yeah.
only gotten like 6,000 votes total
Right.
before he had was appointed to the U.S. Senate. So he's clearly an affirmative action hire
Yeah.
propelled to that position. So it's worked out well for him, right?
Yeah.
Personally, to be on the Republican side.
Yeah.
So that's a whole different thing than his
Yeah.
values and the values of his party, which is something I don't know. He just has to ignore, be in denial about it in order to sleep at night.
I just do not understand. I was talking to an African American friend of mine the other day at dinner, and he was telling me that he's got friends here. Now, I live in South Carolina, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. He's got friends here, African American friends who are going to vote for Trump. And I just do not understand why anybody would vote against their own self-interest. And that's what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that part of this I talk in the book about how the core part of there's a Confederate battle plan, and
Yeah.
part of it is distorting public opinion.
Yeah.
And so they try to downplay and distance themselves from the things that are actually hostile to the
Mhm.
interests of people of color at sometimes and play up other issues. And that's just part of their immigration appeal, is to
Yeah.
try to split people of color and try to tell African Americans, oh, those Mexicans are going to take your jobs, so therefore you should be against them.
Right.
So it is perplexing, but at the same time, there's never been any Democratic nominee who's gotten less than 80% of the black vote.
Yeah.
And Biden got close to 90% last time. And I suspect that's going to be the same this time around.
He's continuing his tirade against immigrants. You mentioned Mexicans a minute ago. And he even sabotaged what turned out to be a bipartisan immigration reform bill that would have helped end some of the problems at the southern border. Now, that's part of his Make America White Again plan, right?
Yeah, no, they have no interest in governance, and they have no interest in things working well,
Right.
particularly when it's a question of when Democrats are in power, because they think it's
Right.
going to accrue to their benefit.
Yeah.
So they're very much trying to just create as much chaos and confusion and then try to blame all of that on Biden. And
Yeah.
so they don't have any actual interest in solving real problems, because the essence of their appeal is grievance. And so you have to continue to have problems in order to stoke the flames of the grievance that they're relying upon.
Hey, do you think that most Americans want to see a multiracial democracy, or do you believe that's a pipe dream? that some of
No,
us.
it's very clear to me that the majority of people do want that,
Yeah.
and that it's what I talked about in my first book, Brown is the New White, was trying to quantify
Mm.
and give context and background to the Obama coalition, so that what I call a meaningful minority of whites have always wanted this country to be more multiracial. You had abolitionists, you've got people in the civil rights movement. Now, they were not the majority, and frankly, they're still not the majority, but it's a meaningful enough minority, around 38-40% of whites,
Yeah.
allied with people of color. That's the majority of people in the country, and that majority is growing every day. And that's the other aspect of what is driving Republican politics, is stoking fears around this changing composition, because people can see it and they feel it in their bones that the nature of the country is going to change in terms of its racial composition. But quantitatively, it's pretty clear. And even if you look at the presidential elections, the closest thing we have to a national referendum, with the exception of the 2004 election of Kerry versus Bush, the
Yeah.
Democrats won the popular vote
Mhm.
in every single presidential election since 1992.
Mhm.
And so that further shows that the raw numbers are on the progressive side, which is why the Republicans on the right are so ferociously determined to try to suppress the vote. They don't want people to actually come out.
How was it in Georgia that Stacey Abrams lost her bid for governor, but Reverend Ralph Warnock won that Senate seat?
Yeah,
How
so I
how
talk about that in the book, and I think
yeah,
that's one of the big questions people have in national politics. And so it's
yeah,
important to people point to why did Stacey lose? People say, see, that mobilize people of color doesn't work. Stacey lost. And first of all, it is important, as you were saying, to not skip over Warnock winning.
yeah,
Warnock was not supposed to be, and my whole Georgia chapter opens up talking about Warnock and his family and how the origins of this runoff election system are designed to prevent somebody like from Warnock winning.
yeah,
The fact that the literal successor to Martin Luther King, the man who stands in the pulpit where King used to preach in Ebenezer Baptist Church, is now in the U.S. Senate and has won, I think, 5 elections now over a number of years from all the different runoffs.
yeah.
That's powerful, and we shouldn't skip that. So then what about Stacey? Why isn't Stacey why didn't she also win? Clear difference between the two of them
Mhm.
is gender. And we don't like to talk about that, but there has never been in this country a Black woman elected governor. And so that's a long data set that's it's not because we haven't had talented, smart, qualified people. It has to do with the electorate. And then the other part of what happened was in Georgia, Stacey was a victim of her own success because of the work that she had done that got Biden elected and got Warnock and Ossoff elected and flipped the U.S. Senate. The Senate moved trillions of dollars out into the country, including billions to Georgia. So
Yeah.
Brian Kemp could take billions of dollars from the federal government, go around the state and hand it out and do projects and burnish his own credentials.
Right.
So that also supported him. So incumbency, and one of my friends referring to use this phrase, the misogynoir of not wanting a Black woman to be governor. Stacey and Warnock got the same percentage of the Black vote.
Mhm.
But she got 5% less of the white vote, and that is what the difference
That's
was.
what the difference was. Yeah. Okay. Now, in your book, which, by the way, I just have to say I thoroughly enjoyed. I haven't
Oh,
finished
thank you.
all of it, but it's a good read. It really is. It's packed with great information and insight. In your book, you write that modern day conservatives and many liberals promote the idea that Black people are poor because they lack the necessary skills, training, and character to get good jobs or run businesses that can generate wealth. What's your response to that?
So that's a very critical piece. I talk about it in this book, and then also my previous book, Brown is the New White,
Yeah,
and I talk about why do white people have all the money. And it's interesting. It was Ben Carson, right? When he ran for president 2016, an
yeah,
African American surgeon,
right.
and he would talk about says my mom was poor and we were disciplined and we had, and I always wanted to ask him, why was your mom poor? How did she get poor? What did this actually come about? And so that's where it's helpful to take a clear look at this history of this country, that at its most elemental, you had Europeans take people from Africa to come over to work this land, which was taken from its indigenous inhabitants, and then work the land for free. And so there's a lot of documentation around how slavery, and particularly in terms of the rise of cotton, created the wealth within this country. Some of the different large insurance companies got their start insuring Black bodies to slave owners. And that's how they get that. I was thinking about this the other day. That was their startup capital. That was the seed funding for these companies to actually become successful. So you have that. And so then you have slavery running up to all the way through 1865, overthrowing it. And so we've only even had the pretense of democracy and equality since 1964, the year I was born. And so then you look at how would people have gotten, like, how would they have caught up? And I talked in the previous book about the GI Bill, which a lot of people don't understand, that the government handed billions of dollars to largely whites, also through the New Deal. Who was excluded from the New Deal? Domestic workers and farm workers, African Americans and Latinos. And so we have structurally created this racial wealth gap.
Yeah.
And then if you have that big a gap, how do you overcome it? You have to, if you each had a stock portfolio, one person's got 100,000, one person has 10,000, you've got to outperform like by 10 times, which is really an impossible thing to do. So that the racial wealth gap in this country was created by the government and has been perpetuated by the government. And so that is what we have to lift up and not just say, oh, it's just the fault. The behavioral traits of people in poverty is why they're poor.
Yeah, you mentioned that the coalition that is moving forward are white Democrats who care and African Americans. Do you believe that Democrats have been strong enough in refuting the Republican effort to overthrow the government? And why? And what should they do?
In general, I think the Democrats are too timid, in
Yeah.
that they really have this fear that they're going to lose support if they take too strong a stand around any kind of equality or justice issues.
Yeah.
And what they don't understand is that actually the way to increase white support is to take strong stands and summon white people to their highest and best selves.
Yeah.
Empirically, looking at electoral results, the Democrats have did the best among getting white voters when they challenged the country to elect a Black president. And white people responded to that.
Yeah.
But that has not permeated the top levels of progressive and democratic politics. And you somewhat, unfortunately, still see it in some of the Biden administration efforts around, I don't know if you use the word pandering, but maybe around the border piece, trying to show they're also tough on the border, et cetera.
Yeah.
And there's a reluctance to be too strongly identified as supporting, particularly people of color. They think they're going to lose white support and don't understand that's actually a way to increase white support is by challenging white folks to embrace the concept that this is a multiracial country. But that's not conventional wisdom at the top levels of the Democratic Party, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, it's not. Do you feel like there's been enough clarity in terms of what Biden has accomplished, though, in his 3+ years as president?
No, not at all. And it's interesting because historically, Biden has never been a progressive figure. His political roots and identity has always been very moderate, et cetera.
Right.
But he's actually been a far more progressive president than people realize.
Yeah.
And they've not done that great job really of telling that story. So everything from the economy, 14 million new jobs being created,
Right.
putting Ketanji Brown Jackson on the Supreme Court, the $2 trillion in relief that was passed in 2021.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot they've done, but they haven't done a very good job of telling the story. I do think he started to do better with the State of the Union and being more unapologetic
Yeah.
and challenging the opposition. And so that was a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
But for the past 3 years, it's been not nearly as effective or high volume as it really should be.
Yeah, I thought the State of the Union address was a good job by Biden, and I thought that he came out of his, I don't know, you call it a shell or whatever,
Mhm.
but he was much more pointed than he's been in the past and much more direct. And I don't know, I thought that it was a positive step, and I hope that it translates into that. I've seen some press reports that seem to indicate that may be the case.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a very good speech. I was very
Uh,
pleasantly surprised.
Us too.
Strong, how
Yeah,
unapologetic,
yeah,
how much he stood up and fought, articulated what it is he's actually for. And even this, one of the things that was driving me crazy was Ezra Klein at the New York Times had done two podcasts and written a column saying that Biden should drop out,
yeah.
and which was absurd. So I wrote a column for The Nation saying that I think that Biden actually is the front runner. If you look at the underlying trends here,
Hmm. Hmm.
but after the State of the Union, Klein's written a column saying basically a mea culpa, saying, no, this is different now. Maybe he shouldn't drop out. So what are you going to do?
Yeah, that's right. Hey, what would be the consequence, though, if Trump should defeat Biden and return to the presidency?
It's going to be, it would be, I don't know, cataclysmic is quite the right word, but I was just rereading some again today of what the level. See, Trump was an accidental president in that he was really only running to build up his own fame and his
Right.
own adulation. He had
Yeah,
no plans and intention to win. Nobody thought he was going to win, including anybody
right.
on his side.
Yeah.
And then so he stumbled into this, and then he in some ways, to our benefit, spent a year or 2 years fumbling around. And plus,
Mhm.
he's fairly lazy, so he didn't have a lot of energy to try to. So I think like they could have really messed with the census a lot more than they actually did, and they were too late to do that.
Mhm.
So there are things like that, but they're ready now. There are times they've been laying the groundwork. And one of the most alarming parts of what they're talking about doing is actively trying to make the country whiter by deporting as many people of color as possible. And so, in this label of illegals and illegal immigrants or whatever, they're talking about trying to deport millions of people and making plans, logistical plans for how you would go about doing this in ways that are very evocative of the Japanese American internment. And we rounded up people of Japanese descent. And so this country very much could be in for that type of struggle and battle in terms of if he were to actually get back into the White House, as well as the question of people have been saying, would this be our last election? You don't really have elections about, are you going to have a dictatorship? You have an election, and then the person who gets into power refuses to leave.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is also a very real danger. And he would just say, we don't need to have another election. And then everyone's gone along with him for everything so far. So that's another reality of what we would be facing. So
Well,
the stakes are enormous.
what about for the African American community itself?
Well, it's hard to even, well, first of all, I try not to spend too much time going down that line.
Yeah.
And it's all contextual. So I've been getting more into art recently, and so I've gotten this painting of this artist John Biggers, and it's of African American working in the field picking cotton.
Okay.
And the reason I got this, I was at an event once with Jesse Jackson in the late '80s, and someone said, "Oh, Jesse, you must be very tired. You're flying all over the country." And Jesse says, without missing a beat, beats picking cotton. And I thought it was such a good contextualization of what we would be facing and up against. And so I think holding that level of framework, and that we've had a lot of tough fights within this country over the past 400 years, and this would be a dark period. But I still believe ultimately that fundamentally, because of these underlying demographic changes, that the trend is in our favor. And so we need to keep organizing and keep fighting and keep translating that population majority into a governing majority.
I know that your book has the premise that we are still fighting a civil war. But do you believe that if Trump should be convicted and ultimately loses the election, that we will indeed face a civil war?
What will be interesting to see, and this is what was interesting, I went back and looked at in terms of what we talked about before, in terms of how the succession happened, that it was after the election in which people refused to accept the results.
Mm-hmm.
And then South Carolina leading the way, and then the other 7 states, and ultimately 11 states, left the Union. And then that led to the Civil War. So it wasn't like there was an immediate declaration of war on the country.
Right.
It was, I don't belong to this country anymore. I could certainly see, and you're already seeing elements of it. And when there was the FBI went into Mar-a-Lago to get the documents,
Right.
you had the governor talking about not honoring the request of the federal government. I think you've got all these anti-FBI, formerly the Law and Order Party, now is all against the FBI.
Yeah.
And so I could easily see we're already seeing this. And what was January 6th? But a refusal to accept the legitimate will of the majority of people and to honor the democratic institutions in this country. So they've already come under attack, and that what I think would just likely accelerate. In a war we only have so much time, energy, and effort. I prefer to spend our time around how do we win than the contingency planning around if we don't.
Okay.
But it is something we do need to think about sometimes.
Well, speaking of how do we win, what should progressives and Democrats do to defeat Trump, hold the Senate majority, and regain the House?
So the fundamental reality is that there is a multiracial progressive majority.
Yeah.
And that's why the right is so obsessed with trying to stop people from voting and trying to make it as hard as possible to vote. So that's the fundamental issue. You need to get as many people as possible to vote, find the groups and the leaders who are doing the work to help people overcome the obstacles to voting, back those groups, champion voting, talk up the elections, because when there is high turnout, we win, which is why they're trying to make it there to be low turnout as much as possible.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Steve, listen, where can people find your book? It's just been published today, right?
Yeah, the paperback is out today. You
Yeah.
can get it wherever you get books on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indie Press also as well.
Yeah.
And then I've got links and all that on my website, stevephillips.com.
Okay, great. All right, Steve, listen, I really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us today on the Lean to the Left podcast. I know you've had a busy day, and I'm grateful that we were included in your round of podcast appearances today. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Hey, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Lean to the Left video and you found it interesting and informative. Please visit on a regular basis and check out our interviews with guests on topics that focus on progressive politics and the important social issues of our time. Now, our interview shows stream on Mondays with special episodes on Thursdays. And you can check out upcoming shows, guests, and topics at podcast.leantotheleft.net. Subscribe to our audio version there and to our video shows here at YouTube. And follow us on social media. Facebook at Bob Gaddy and the Lean to the Left podcast. Now it's two. Bob Gaddy is one Facebook page, and the Lean to the Left podcast is a second Facebook page. Twitter at Lean to the Left 1, Instagram at Lean to the Left 1, TikTok at Lean to the Left, LinkedIn at Bob Gaddy, and YouTube at Lean to the Left. Now, I hope you'll support Lean to the Left as well so we can keep things going. Just click on the Donate tab at the top of the leantotheleft.net homepage and contribute by buying me a cup of coffee. That'll really help and would be much, much, much appreciated. Now, this is Bob Gaddy signing off for Lean to the Left. Thanks for sharing your time with us.